The last of the day's energy had drained from the building, leaving behind a profound silence that hummed in the air. For the dancers, the day was over. Their laughter, their grunts of effort, the thumping rhythm of their feet on the maple floors, it had all faded out the front door with them. But for him, the work was just beginning. He pushed his wide, gray cleaning cart down the long, echoing hallway, the squeak of its wheels the only sound breaking the quiet. His world, for the next few hours, would be contained within these four walls. These empty rooms that still felt warm and alive. With the memory of movement, he was a man who lived in the margins of other people's passions. By day, this place was a temple of art and sweat, a world of discipline and dreams. By night, it was his domain. He moved from studio to studio, his routine as practiced and precise as any dance. First, he would gather the discarded water bottles, the stray towels, the little pink bits of rosin that looked like scattered candy. Then he would take out his broom. His movements with the broom were not just functional. They were kind of quiet, flowing poetry. He didn't just sweep, he glided. The long, soft bristles whispered across the wood, gathering dust and grit in a steady, rhythmic pattern. His body remembered a different kind of discipline, a different kind of floor. There was a grace to the way he pivoted, the way he shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a muscle memory that his current job could never fully erase. It was a sad, slow dance performed for an audience of none. He was the shadow that erased the day, the one who cleaned up the sweat and the effort so that tomorrow the dancers could start all over again, fresh and new. To them, he was invisible. He was the man who pushed the broom, the quiet figure in the corner they walked past without a glance. He was part of the building's machinery, as expected and as unnoticed as the lights or the water fountain on this particular night. As he finished with the first two large studios, he saw that the light was still on in Studio C. He sighed softly, a familiar, weary sound. It was usually the same one, the star pupil. The one everyone talked about, the one whose dedication was as legendary as her talent. He peeked through the small square window in the door. There she was, Anya. He didn't know her name, not officially, but he knew her face. He knew the way she moved, like a force of nature contained in a slender, powerful body. She was a blur of motion, a flash of a black leotard and pink tights. Her dark hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin of her forehead. She was practicing alone, her reflection a determined ghost in the massive wall of mirrors that faced her. The music was low, a simple, pulsing beat that she was moving to, but her focus was entirely internal. She was working on a sequence of turns, a series of rapid, spinning fouettes where one leg whipped out to the side with each rotation. It was a move that required incredible strength, balance, and spot-on precision. As she was failing, he watched her, his hand resting on the handle of his cleaning cart. He didn't feel pity for her. Pity was a useless emotion. What he felt was a deep, resonant ache of understanding. He saw it in the set of her jaw, the tension in her shoulders. She was fighting the move. She was muscling through it, trying to force her body to obey. He saw her go for it, her arms strong, her supporting legs straight as a rod. One turn, 2, 3. Then on the fourth, a tiny wobble. Her ankle faltered. Her balance deserted her. She came out of the turn with a sharp, frustrated stamp of her foot, letting out a breath that was half-grown. Half-sigh, she ran a hand through her hair, messing up the perfect bun, and paced the floor for a moment like a caged animal. He could almost feel the heat of her frustration from the hallway. She was the Academy's golden girl, the one who made everything look effortless. But here, in the empty studio, he saw the truth. Effortless was an illusion. It was built on a mountain of hidden, frustrating, soul-crushing effort. She tried again. The music pulsed. She launched into the turns. 1, 2, 3, 4. This time she made it to 5 before her hip dropped and the turn fell apart. She stumbled, catching herself on the bar that ran along the wall. Her head hung low for a moment, her chest heaving. He saw it all with a dancer's eye, even after all these years. He saw the tiny flaw she was missing. She was turning her head too late, her spot was off, which threw her entire alignment. It was a mistake of a fraction of a second, but it was the difference between brilliance and failure. He had made the same mistake 1,000 times himself in a dusty studio a lifetime ago. A familiar old ache tightened in his own knee, a phantom reminder of the day his own dancing had ended. He knew the language of her struggle better than anyone. He knew the feeling of your own body betraying you, of knowing exactly what you wanted to do but being unable to make it listen. He saw the tears of frustration welling in her eyes before she angrily blinked them away. She was not just dancing. She was at war with herself. And she was losing. She stood in the center of the room, her hands on her hips, staring at her own reflection as if it were a personal enemy. The studio was vast and cold around her. The mirrors multiplied her image, creating an army of frustrated young women staring back at her. She was completely, utterly alone in her struggle, unaware that she was being watched by a man who understood it completely. To her, he was just the night janitor, a shadow who would soon come in to sweep away the rosin dust she had kicked up in her anger. She had no idea that on the other side of the door, a silent audience of one held a key she didn't even know she was looking for. He stood there for a long moment, the squeak of his cart's wheels forgotten, just a man watching a woman fight a battle he had once fought himself. The days that followed blurred into a repeating cycle of frustration and fatigue. The annual showcase was no longer a distant goal. It was a giant ticking clock hanging over every moment of her life. Every class, every practice session felt like a test she was failing. Her instructor, a woman with a sharp eye and an even sharper tongue, would clap her hands and say things like, "Technique is perfect, but where is the soul? I'm watching a robot, not an artist." The words would sting, not because they were mean, but because they were true. She felt like a robot. She was going through the motions, her body a machine that was starting to rust and seize up. Her feet ached, her muscles were constantly sore, and she felt a heavy tiredness in her bones that sleep couldn't seem to fix. The custodian watched this slow decline from his usual post in the hallway. He saw the light in her eyes dim, replaced by a desperate, haunted look. He saw her push herself harder, faster, trying to muscle her way through the problem, which only made it worse. He knew that path. He had walked it himself, right up to the moment his knee had shattered and his world had ended. He saw her making the same mistakes he had, mistaking brute force for artistry. He felt a familiar pang of helplessness. He was just the man who swept the floors. What could he possibly say? Who would listen to him? He would finish his cleaning, the scent of lemony cleaner hanging in the air, and go home to his small, quiet apartment. The image of her struggling form burned into his mind. One night, after watching her crumple to the floor in a heap of exhaustion and defeat, something inside him shifted. He couldn't just stand by and watch. It wasn't about saving her career. It was about preserving the dance itself. He remembered a wise old teacher who had once told him, "Dance isn't about what you do with your feet. It's about what you do with your heart, and your feet just follow." The young woman in the studio had forgotten her heart. He reached into the pocket of his worn work jacket and pulled out a small pad of yellow sticky notes and a cheap ballpoint pen. His hands, which were usually so sure with a broom or a mop, felt clumsy and large as he carefully printed a short sentence. He waited until she had gathered her things, her shoulders slumped, and left the studio, her footsteps heavy in the hall. Once she was gone, he slipped inside. The room still felt warm from her effort. He walked to the massive mirror, his reflection a ghostly figure beside her own, and stuck the small yellow square right in the center, at eye level. Then he quickly retreated to the shadows, his heart thumping a little faster than usual. The next morning, she walked into the studio, her bag slung over her shoulder, already dreading the day's practice. But she stopped dead when she saw the mirror. Tucked there was a bright yellow note. She frowned, looking around the empty room. A prank? A message from the cleaning staff? She walked closer and read the neat, simple handwriting. Asterisk, your turn starts in your core before your feet even leave the floor. Breathe up. Asterisk, she stared at it, confused. It wasn't the kind of advice her instructor gave. It was different, simpler, more internal. She peeled the note off the glass, her fingers tracing the words. She looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and laugh, but the studio was silent. Feeling a little silly, she decided to try it. What did she have to lose? She stood in the center of the room, closed her eyes for a second, and took a deep breath, focusing on the feeling of her stomach muscles tightening, lifting her entire torso from the inside out. Then she went for the turn sequence. It wasn't perfect, but it felt lighter. The first turn was easier. The second was more controlled. She still messed up on the fourth, but the difference was undeniable. A tiny spark of hope flickered in her chest. Over the next few days, the notes became a regular thing. She would arrive each morning to find a new yellow square waiting for her. She never saw who left them. She started looking, her eyes scanning the hallways, watching the other staff members as they came and went. Was it the friendly lady at the front desk? The grumpy maintenance man? She became a detective in her own life, but the mystery remained unsolved. The notes continued, each one a small, profound piece of wisdom. Asterisk, listen for the silence between the beats of the music. This one changed everything. She stopped fighting the rhythm and started flowing with it, finding a new patience in the quiet moments. Another one read, asterisk, what story is your left hand telling? She had never even thought about her left hand. She realized it was just hanging there, a useless appendage. She started giving it purpose, letting it reach, to float, to express the emotion of the dance. She started to notice the custodian more. He was always there, a quiet presence in the background, pushing his cart, mopping the floors. She would see him leaning on his broom, watching her for a moment before moving on. She never suspected him. To her, he was just part of the building, as permanent and unremarkable as the bars on the walls. He was the invisible man, and her mystery helper was, in her mind, someone sophisticated, maybe a retired dancer or a secret admirer. The idea that it could be the quiet janitor never even entered her mind. As the days turned into a week, the change in her dancing became obvious, at least to her. The frustrating block was beginning to crumble. The turns were still a challenge, but they were no longer a war. She was finding a new ease, a new connection to the music and to her own body. Her movements were becoming less forced and more fluid. She was starting to feel the joy in it again, the pure, simple pleasure of moving through space. One afternoon, her instructor paused the music and watched her with a curious expression. "There's something different about you," she said, her head tilted. "You're softer. Keep going." The young dancer just smiled, a secret smile that was just for her and her anonymous friend. She felt like she was sharing a wonderful, beautiful secret with the world, and it made her feel strong and alive in a way she hadn't for months. The notes weren't just fixing her turns. They were healing her spirit. The sky outside the large studio windows had been turning a dark, bruised purple for hours. The young dancer had been so lost in her own world of frustration that she hadn't noticed the clouds gathering. Now, as the evening drew in, the first drops of rain began to splatter against the glass, followed by a low rumble of thunder that vibrated through the floorboards. The storm felt like a reflection of the storm raging inside her. She had been practicing for hours, pushing herself to the point of exhaustion, trying to capture the new feeling her mysterious notes had given her. But it was slipping through her fingers like sand. The music played, a haunting melody that was supposed to be filled with hope, but it just sounded sad to her ears. She launched into her solo, her body moving through the familiar choreography. But tonight it felt wrong. Every step was a fight. The connection she had felt just days ago was gone, replaced by a clumsy, desperate energy. She could feel the pressure of the showcase bearing down on her, the weight of everyone's expectations. She thought of the yellow notes, now a small, precious collection tucked into her dance bag. What if the magic was gone? What if she had imagined it all? As she prepared for the crucial series of turns at the climax of the piece, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. In that split second of blinding light, she lost her focus. The thunder that followed was a deafening crack that shook the building. And at the exact same moment, the lights flickered wildly before plunging the studio into near total darkness. The music cut out, leaving only the sound of the storm and her own ragged breathing. Startled and disoriented, her feet tangled beneath her. She didn't just fall. She crumpled, landing hard on the wooden floor. The impact knocked the wind out of her. For a moment, she just lay there in the dim, eerie light coming from the emergency exit sign. The floor was cold against her skin. And then the tears came. They weren't the quiet, frustrated tears of before. These were deep, racking sobs that shook her entire body. It was the release of weeks, maybe months, of pent-up pressure, fear, and exhaustion. She was tired of being perfect, tired of fighting, tired of feeling so completely and utterly alone in her struggle. She curled into a ball on the floor, the vast, empty studio feeling like it was closing in on her, and just let the storm outside and the storm inside her rage together. From the darkened corner of the studio, a voice spoke. It was a calm, quiet voice that cut through the sound of her sobs and the rain lashing against the windows. "You're fighting the floor," it said. "Let it hold you." She froze, her tears stopping abruptly. Her head snapped up, her eyes trying to pierce the gloom. She could see a silhouette standing near the door, a figure she recognized with a jolt of surprise and embarrassment. It was the custodian. He was just standing there, holding his broom, a dark shape against the faint light from the hallway. How long had he been there? Had he seen her fall? Had he seen her crying? A hot flush of shame crept up her neck. "What do you know about it?" she asked, her voice sharp and defensive, a knee-jerk reaction to her vulnerability. She scrambled to her feet, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to regain some semblance of dignity. "You're just the janitor." The words came out harsher than she intended, but she felt exposed and cornered. The man didn't flinch. He didn't seem offended by her words. He just stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between them, filled only by the drumming of the rain. Then he slowly leaned his broom against the wall. The simple, deliberate movement was somehow more powerful than any angry retort. He walked toward the center of the room, his steps quiet and sure. He stopped in the exact spot where she had fallen. "I know that when you fight it, you'll always lose," he said softly, his voice still calm and even. "The floor, the music, your own body, you have to partner with them, not try to command them." He looked at her for a moment, his eyes barely visible in the gloom. Then he turned his attention to the space in front of him. He took a breath, and then he began to move. He started with the very sequence that had been tormenting her, the series of rapid, whipping turns. He wasn't wearing the right shoes, just his worn work boots. His clothes were baggy and ill-fitting for dance. But as he went into the first turn, it was clear that he understood. It wasn't a perfect, polished performance like the ones she saw on stage. There was a slight, almost imperceptible hitch in his movement, a ghost of an old injury in the way he landed, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the way he moved. There was a fluidity, an ease, a deep understanding in his body that took her breath away. He wasn't just doing the steps. He was explaining them with his entire being. He made it look simple, natural, like breathing. He finished the sequence and stood for a moment, his chest rising and falling, a quiet stillness settling over him. The young dancer just stared, her mouth slightly open. All her frustration, her pride, her defensiveness, it all melted away, replaced by a sense of pure awe. In that one, quiet demonstration, he had shown her more than any instructor had in months. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I used to dance," he said, his voice quiet. "For a long time. It was all I ever wanted to do." He paused, looking down at his hands for a moment. "Then a car accident shattered my knee." He said it simply, as a statement of fact, without a trace of self-pity. "The doctors said I'd be lucky to walk without a limp. Dancing again was not an option." He looked around the empty studio, a faint, sad smile on his face. "So I do this now. I stay close to the dance. I sweep the floors and clean the mirrors. I watch the young ones with the fire in their bellies. It's enough. Most days it's enough." He looked back at her, and in the faint light she thought she saw a flicker of that same fire in his eyes. I stay because I love it too much to leave it behind completely. In that moment, the world shifted for her. The labels of dancer and janitor, star pupil and invisible man, they all dissolved. They were gone. In their place was just two people standing in a dark room during a storm, connected by a shared language that didn't need words. He wasn't just a custodian, and she wasn't just a dancer. They were kindred spirits. He had shown her his soul, not with a speech, but with a turn. And she understood, finally, that the notes, the wisdom, the quiet guidance had all come from him. The mysterious benefactor she had imagined was this quiet, humble man who loved dance so much he was willing to sweep its floors just to be near it. The silence that followed his confession was heavier than the thunder that had shaken the building moments before. The storm outside was beginning to pass, but the storm of understanding and emotion raging inside the young dancer was just beginning. She looked at the man before her, not as a janitor, not as a shadow, but as a fellow traveler on a path she thought only she walked. The slight, almost invisible way he favored one leg, the quiet wisdom in his eyes, it all suddenly made sense. The yellow notes weren't just advice. They were lifelines thrown from a man who had been in the same deep water and knew how to swim. From that night on, a new routine began. After the official instructors had left for the day, after the other dancers had gone home, the studio would become their secret world. He would finish his cleaning in the other rooms first, then he would come to Studio C, not with a broom, but with a quiet presence. He never called himself a coach, and she never called him a teacher. He was simply there. He didn't teach her steps. She already knew the steps. He taught her the why behind them. "You're solo," he said one evening, leaning against the bar as she caught her breath. "It's about a bird, right? A bird learning to fly?" She nodded, surprised. "You're dancing like you're afraid of falling? Dance like you're more afraid of never flying." It was a simple sentence, but it unlocked something in her. She had been so focused on the technical perfection of the leaps and turns, on making sure she didn't fall, that she had forgotten the feeling of flight. He started using metaphors, simple human ideas that she could connect to. "When you reach your arms up," he'd say, "don't just lift them. Imagine you're trying to touch the memory of a warm, sunny day. Let that memory pull you up. When you turn, don't just spin. Think of a time you were so happy you couldn't stop yourself from twirling. Find that feeling in your stomach?" He was helping her turn her solo from a cold, technical exercise into a living, breathing story of loss and hope. It became their story. The slow, mournful beginning was his memory of the accident, the feeling of something precious being broken. The struggle in the middle was her own frustration, his own painful rehabilitation. And the final, soaring crescendo was the bird with the broken wing finally finding the courage to leap from the nest. Not because it knew it would succeed, but because it knew it had to try. She started to see the dance in a completely new light. A difficult turn wasn't just a test of balance. It was a moment of dizzying uncertainty. A long, slow extension of her leg wasn't just about flexibility. It was a gesture of longing, of reaching for something that seemed impossibly far away. Her movements became softer, more honest, more human. She wasn't just performing. She was revealing pieces of her own heart, pieces of his heart, on that stage. The studio, once a place of pressure, became a sanctuary, a place where two souls could speak to each other through the universal language of movement. Then, the night of the showcase arrived. Backstage was a chaotic whirlwind of activity. The air was thick with the smell of hairspray and nervous sweat. Dancers in colorful costumes stretched and chattered nervously, their voices a low, excited hum. The young dancer sat on a bench in a quiet corner, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. The old fears crept back in. What if she forgot the choreography? What if she fell? What if the magic she had found in those late-night sessions disappeared under the bright, hot glare of the stage lights? She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, just as he had taught her. She tried to find that quiet place inside, but the noise and the pressure were overwhelming. Her hands felt cold and clammy. She felt like an imposter about to be exposed. A few minutes before she was due to go on, she slipped over to the side of the stage and peeked through the heavy velvet curtain. The theater was a vast, dark cavern, filled with a sea of shadowy faces. Her heart pounded against her ribs. It was too big, too much. And then her eyes found him. He wasn't in a plush seat in the orchestra section. He was standing at the very back of the theater, leaning against a wall in his simple street clothes, almost invisible in the shadows. He was holding his broom, not like a tool, but like a staff, a silent anchor in the storm. He was where he had always been, on the outside looking in, but he was there. He was watching Dot as if he felt her gaze. His eyes met hers across the distance. The entire noisy, chaotic world seemed to fall away. There was only the two of them. He didn't smile or wave. He just gave a single, slow, reassuring nod. It was a simple gesture, but it was everything. It said, "I'm here. I see you. You know what to do? Just tell our story." The nod was like a key turning in a lock inside her. The anxiety didn't vanish, but it changed. It transformed from a paralyzing fear into a sharp, focused energy. The knot in her stomach loosened. She took one last deep breath and stepped back from the curtain. The announcer called her name. She walked out onto the stage, the single spotlight hitting her like a warm sun. The low murmur of the crowd faded into a respectful silence. The music began, that same haunting melody she had struggled with for so long. But this time it was different. As she moved into the first steps, she was not just a dancer performing a solo. She was the bird with the broken wing. She was the man with the shattered knee. She was every person who had ever lost something and dared to hope again. She didn't just dance. She wept and rejoiced with her body. Each leap was a desperate prayer, a breathtaking moment of suspension where the entire audience held its breath with her. Each turn was a whirlwind of memory and release. When her arms reached out, it was as if she was trying to touch a memory just out of reach, just as he had described. The audience wasn't just watching technique. They were feeling a story. They could feel the ache, the struggle, and the soaring. Triumphant hope, when the final note of music hung in the air and she held the last pose, her body trembling with effort and emotion. There was a beat of absolute, stunned silence in the theater. It was as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then a single person began to clap, and suddenly the entire room erupted. The applause was a wave of sound so loud it was almost physical. It was a thundering, deafening roar, and people were rising to their feet, one by one, until the entire crowd was standing. She stood there in the light, her chest heaving, tears of gratitude and release streaming down her face. She bowed, but her eyes were scanning the back of the theater, looking for the shadow that had given her wings. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a warm wave of sound that washed over her, but she barely felt it. Faces swam in front of her, a blur of smiles and open mouths, all offering congratulations. Her instructor was there, her eyes shining with a pride the young dancer had never seen before, her hand squeezing her arm tightly. "That was it," the instructor said, her voice thick with emotion. That was everything. Other dancers, her rivals and her friends, patted her on the back, their admiration genuine and unreserved. She was the star of the night, the girl who had flown. She smiled and nodded and murmured her thanks, but her eyes were constantly scanning the sea of people, looking for one quiet face, one simple, reassuring nod, but he was gone. The shadow at the back of the theater had vanished. A part of her felt a pang of disappointment, but another part understood. This was her world, not his. The bright lights and the loud applause were not for him. He had given her the gift, and his part was done. She allowed herself to be swept away in the current of celebration for a little while, accepting flowers and posing for pictures, her body still buzzing with the energy of the dance. But the more people praised her, the more she felt the need to escape. Their praise was for the performance, for the perfect execution. But the dance itself, the real story, was a secret she shared with only one other person. After what felt like an eternity, she politely excused herself from a group of patrons, slipping away from the bright, noisy backstage area. The contrast was immediate. The hallway was cool and dim, the muffled sounds of the after-party fading behind her. Each step she took away from the celebration felt like a step closer to where she needed to be. She walked past the empty offices and the darkened lobby, her footsteps echoing on the polished marble. She wasn't thinking, just following a pull, an instinct that led her back to the place where it had all truly changed. She pushed open the heavy door to Studio C. The room was empty, bathed in the soft, silver light of a full moon that streamed through the large windows. The floor was immaculate, swept clean and gleaming. And there, in the center of the room, was the man. He wasn't watching her or waiting for her. He was simply working. He was using a small dustpan, carefully sweeping up the stray rose petals and bits of confetti that had been thrown on stage at the end of the show, tracking them in on her shoes. He was back in his role, restoring order, erasing the magic so that tomorrow the dance could begin again. The quiet, rhythmic scrape of his dustpan against the wood was the only sound in the vast, peaceful room. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching him. He looked up and saw her, and his movements paused. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by a small, gentle smile. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, holding his dustpan, waiting for her. She didn't rush in. She didn't gush about her success or thank him for his help. The performance, the applause, the standing ovation, it all felt like it had happened to someone else, a lifetime ago. The only thing that felt real was this quiet room and this quiet man. She walked slowly to the center of the clean, moonlit floor, the petals crunching softly under her ballet slippers. She stopped a few feet away from him. The sounds of the distant party were a faint, dreamlike hum. She looked at him, her eyes clear and steady. All the anxiety, all the frustration, all the fear was gone. In its place was a deep, abiding sense of peace and gratitude. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if they would ever speak of this again. But she knew what she needed to do right now. "Dance with me," she said softly. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a command. It was a simple statement of fact, as natural as breathing. He looked at her, then down at the dustpan in his hand, then back at her. He seemed to consider it for a moment, weighing the world of the janitor against the world of the dancer. Then a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. He leaned over and carefully placed the dustpan and its small pile of petals on the floor by the wall. He straightened up and took a step toward her. He didn't take her hand in a formal way. He simply held it out, and she placed hers in his. His other hand came to rest gently on her back. Her hand went to his shoulder. There was no music. There was no audience. There was only the moonlight and the silent, empty studio. He began to move, and she followed. It wasn't a performance piece or a complicated routine. It was a simple, slow waltz, a dance of balance and connection. He led with a quiet confidence, his steps sure and steady. She followed with an instinctive trust, her body moving in perfect harmony with his. It was a different kind of dance than the one she had performed on stage. That one was about soaring and reaching, a story of struggle and triumph. This one was about being present, about the quiet space between two people. It was a dance not of technique, but of gratitude, respect, and a connection that had been forged in the quiet hours when the only sound was a broom sweeping across a floor. As they moved together in the silver light, she realized that this quiet, simple dance was the most beautiful one of all.